cold calls have been 60 to 70% of the meetings that have been booked by the SDRs. I've recently started strength training. I used to play rugby, I used to play football. As unfortunately you get a little bit older, your joints kind of hurt a little bit more. Making sure that you're respecting yourself and your mental health, taking breaks when you need them.
Welcome to the ISP NextGen Podcast, where we speak to salespeople about their journeys to help you demystify the profession. And now today, we are joined by Amarjit Mudhar, founder of Hunter Ops. Ams, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Yeah, very, very well. Thank you so much for having me on today.
No worries, it's an absolute pleasure. Did you want to take a minute to introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the founder of Hunter Ops. So I started Hunter Ops a few months back, but my background is all in sales. Starts off as an SDR, kind of moved through the chain. And I've been an SDR leader for a number of years now, but now I've founded my own organization, Hunter Ops. And that's kind of where I'm currently sitting.
Nice. Love that. Love that. What was it that initially sort of piqued the interest? What was the spark that led you into sales?
So for the spark to lead me into sales is an interesting one. I've always enjoyed engaging with other people and trying to kind of solve problems. And when I first started off as an SDR, it was kind of I don't want to say I fell into it because I didn't, because obviously I actively pursued the career. But even whilst I was at university and just before university, I was in retail. I was always in sort of the sales department selling something, and I enjoyed sort of solving problems and figuring out what people needed and kind of giving them whatever it was that they needed. And I knew that I enjoyed doing that, and sales was just a natural sort of progression for me. Yeah. And that's kind of where my career ultimately started, probably at the age of 16, actually, into kind of becoming an SDR, kind of finishing university, becoming an SDR, and then kind of continuing that journey up until now.
Yeah, brilliant. What was it that you studied at uni?
So I studied retail management or business management, essentially, yeah.
Nice.
So that was kind of, I guess, the trajectory to kind of carry on within sort of that segment.
Indeed. Love that. Now, of course, sales is definitely not an easy role. It comes with highs, lows, everything in between. I'm sure there were challenges that you faced throughout your career. How did you go about overcoming them? Do you have like a framework that you typically use to approach a challenge? Was there anything that you usually?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because I think throughout my sales career, there's always been different challenges along the way. So when I first started was very much kind of, right, I've been kind of like pushed into this tech business or this IT business. How do I now figure out how to sell that? So kind of understanding the product, the solution, what is the value that I'm actually bringing to prospects? So that's always a challenge in any organization you go to. But I realized it very early on when I was on the phone to prospects and they asked me a fairly technical question, or kind of like, ultimately, how does this really affect me? I really needed to know the ins and outs of it. And I think that's kind of where the initial challenges started. But then I think kind of, as you kind of go on in your career, lots of different challenges pop up, from like very basic things to managing your time. How do I deal with objections? And kind of, they're always a constant, but you always pick up little tips and tricks as you kind of go along to kind of, how do you deal with them? How do you get better? And that kind of has, I guess, been cemented in every single role that I've had, from an individual contributor to also a leader as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And I guess a lot of it, when you start out as an SDR, it does feel very overwhelming. You get better at dealing with those challenges. You move to an A, it's a new set of challenges. You move into leadership, as you said, and it's a whole new set of challenges. And you're actually helping individuals to overcome their challenges as well. That's sort of responsibility for you. I wanted to move the conversation towards prospecting. I know it's something that we both are fairly passionate about. It's one of those skills that I think if you're in sales, you always need to be prospecting, regardless of your title, seniority. It's skills that should be with you throughout. Are there any outreach methods that you favor? Any channels that you lean towards? What you want to be most effective?
So the three main channels that I mainly use are cold emails or email prospecting, cold calling, and social media, mainly be LinkedIn. We've also got kind of conferences and events, but that's more of a secondary sort of channel rather than the primary or the first three that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Now they've all got their own, I guess, and every individual also has their own different skills in whether that's email writing, content writing, or whether that's kind of going through having those conversations through a conversation on the phone, or whether that be, using social media LinkedIn to kind of pursue that. So for me, it's throughout my career. So I've been within sales for a decade now, and previously it started off with cold calls where the only way that you can really kind of get hold of prospects. Then it turned into emails, and then slowly LinkedIn kind of came into place. And now it's kind of going through that cycle almost again, where there is so much noise with cold emails or email prospecting. You need to be so particular and precise around the messaging that you send, but also a really big thing is actually getting them to click on the email. So we're talking about internal camouflage through emails and so forth. But my favorite ways at the moment, and where I'm seeing the biggest amount of impact, and it has been with the previous organizations, last two organizations I worked with, cold calls have been solidly at least 60 to 70% of the meetings that are being booked by the SDRs and myself have been through cold calling, where there is so much noise through the inbox. People are actually slowly starting to either answer their phone or guiding sort of them back to their inbox through voicemails. That channel, as long as you've done your research, so you're not cold calling with just a basic script. Hey, this is Ams from Hunter Ops. We sell this and that. We want it to be a bit more interactive and kind of be very precise, saying, look, hey, I understand that you are hiring for, more SDRs. Hunter Ops can help you in these particular ways. I think that's the biggest difference between cold calling. You need to make sure that you have impact very, very early on, and it's going into that call researched. That's been a huge channel, but also social selling. So LinkedIn has been a really big player in it. And I think the difference between that is you need to create your own brand on LinkedIn. So you're trying to be a content creator almost through building out your emails and then kind of the research through your cold calls. But you also need to kind of create your own brand on there. And it's kind of that drip feed effect that really kind of takes place, where your name's popping up in their inbox, their name's kind of popping up, whether that's on a cold call or through a voicemail, and also then kind of through LinkedIn. So it's that kind of channel. But the two biggest ones at the moment are definitely cold calls and LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think just to add to that sort of trifecta, it needs the efforts to be pointed in the same direction, right? And for them to be that combined force rather than individual actions or individual activities, right? Because then it ends up having that multiplicative effect. When you're engaging with someone's content on LinkedIn, you're posting relevant content, then when you make that call, if you can ensure that the person on the other end is at least familiar, with your name, it helps to lower that zone of resistance, right?
Yeah.
Rather than it being like, no, I don't take cold calls, you might have just bought yourself that 10 seconds.
Yeah. And I think a really interesting thing is where we've through sort of the years, you kind of had the original sort of relationship building sales that we originally had. Sort of, I will call my contact in this company because I know that they're in this space. And it's kind of moved into sort of challenger sales, where it's kind of you're challenging what they've already got. But actually, that relationship also has a very big effect, even in prospecting as well, where you kind of mentioned, like, if I'm sending this person an email, they're going to see that Amarjit Mudhar has sent me an email. I might not click on it, but that name now I understand. Then I've connected with them on LinkedIn. Right, Amarjit Mudhar has tried to connect with me on LinkedIn. Okay, like it's not a conscious now. It's not necessarily conscious that I know this person's trying to prospect me, but that name keeps popping up. They've tried to call me. Okay, I didn't answer, but I've heard them on the phone. They've said, look back at my email, and you kind of converting it back to, send them back to the email. But it's always that drip feed effect that you sort of mentioned, which has such a big impact where we don't think it necessarily does, but it will eventually. So whether that's kind of they eventually react to one of your content and posts that you sent out on LinkedIn to then actually responding to your email and so forth. So the whole big drip effect, and it's building almost that relationship, which is not, you don't always necessarily think that that's happening.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't even see it, right?
Yes.
So much happens in, places that we can't attribute, whether that's, an in-person networking event or a Slack channel, a community. We just don't know a lot of the time. So it's really important, as you said, to take that sort of light touch approach, consistently nurturing, rather than, going in willing to burn bridges with, very salesy, pushy approaches. As you mentioned, time is our most valuable resource. We need to ensure that we're spending as much time as possible doing those high impact, revenue generating activities. Have you got any tips for effectively managing your time?
Yeah. I think my favorite one, the one that I swear by pretty much every single day, is blocking out time in my diary.
Yeah.
Blocking out time to do my prospecting, to make my cold calls, to send those personalized emails, the whole process, even time to, do my admin bits. You need to block out your time and be very, very strict with that time blocking. So say, for instance, I need to make, say, 50 calls today. And you need to block that time out to make sure that you are, and it depends on, and there's lots of different variabilities here, like lots of different sort of spinning plates. You can have a time block in the morning, have a time block in the afternoon, but make sure you do that. So if there are sort of tasks that are kind of taking a little bit longer, I don't want to say necessarily sack them off, but you need to make sure that you prioritize them in the right way. And time blocking is always the number one thing for me, is blocking out time every single day. And you can move those time blocks around. Your days don't necessarily have to look the same every single day, but that time blocking helps you stay in line and in course to kind of get your stuff done at the end of the day.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm exactly the same. I need those blocks.
Time management. If you don't manage your time correctly, you can very quickly get overwhelmed. With SDRs and people in sales, if you don't have those time, or you're not managing your time, it's very quickly to get overwhelmed. And overwhelmed slowly leads to kind of burnout. And you want to kind of keep that. You want to keep that in your head when you're trying to kind of just make sure you're maximizing your time. You're being efficient with your time. Because actually, when you know that you're ticking stuff off every single day, it makes the days easier, the weeks better, the months even better, and so forth. And it helps with kind of just managing it not becoming overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's those sort of micro achievements. And to your point about being flexible with the blocks as well, I've started color coding my calendar in terms of like priority levels.
Yeah.
So if something is overrunning, or if something urgent comes in that does take my attention, I know, okay, well, that's, a priority level 4. So that can be taken out and put later.
And I think one really big thing is for SDRs, especially when you're coming into a new role, your manager needs to help you to do that as well, to give you a direction around what is a priority and what is not. So we talk about kind of, the emphasis on prospecting every single day, like that should be a priority. And it can be, whenever, and this is how I kind of dealt with SDRs, is my SDRs that I managed previously, is if at the end of the day you want to do your prospecting for tomorrow, that's okay. So you can have it as a last task on your list, but it needs to happen every single day, because that's the way that you kind of keep that momentum up with prospecting and finding new people to contact sort of on a weekly and daily basis. And if you start to deprioritize, say, prospecting as an example, that's where that chain reaction will happen. Well, actually, at the end of the week, you're looking at next week saying, oh, I don't have that many people to reach out to and so forth. So kind of like having that momentum going as well, and sort of prioritizing that sort of as you go throughout the week.
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's that forward planning, right? It can be so easy, particularly as an SDR, where we often tend to think on a week by week basis, month by month basis, and then you start thinking by quarters, but it is a little bit shorter term than, a full cycle sales role, for example, typically, right? Yeah. I've got to say. So it is about trying to lift your head where you can to look forward, because, we know in summer there's that lull. We know around Q4 there's the lull. So what can we do to perhaps bring things forward and ensure that we've got enough in the pipeline, we've got enough conversations taking place that we can try to eradicate the sort of ebbs and flows?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, if you're having a great week, that is amazing.
Yeah.
And if you're having a bad week, okay, fine, we all have them. But the way that you manage your time and the task that you do shouldn't, especially within SDR, and they should not necessarily change from week to week. They should be sort of that solid piece. So, it's a numbers game. At the end of the day, so you need to kind of have that momentum where you are continuously have that sort of that constant sort of momentum of, I'm making sure that I'm making all these calls that I need to sort of on a daily basis. Yeah, because those small wins every single day would lead to good steps at the end of the week, and then at the end of the month, you're ever so closer to sort of hitting your target and so forth. So everything sort of helps to kind of keep that on, but you need to kind of keep that momentum going, sort of on that daily basis, which is so important.
What's one thing that you've done recently outside of work that you're really proud of?
Yeah, good question. It's a good question. So for me, is I've recently started strength training. So some of my LinkedIn posts, you might have seen sort of me in the gym and so forth. So I used to play a lot of sports. I used to play rugby, I used to play football. As unfortunately you get a little bit older, your joints kind of hurt a little bit more, or dislocated shoulders. So started strength training. So that's kind of like my main focus at the moment is doing there. So lifting some super heavy weights, and the ambition is to do a high rocks at some point soon. So that's kind of what I'm training for at the moment.
Nice. Intense. I don't know enough. I've heard bits and bobs, but generally I've heard it madness, like super intense.
Yeah, so the training's taking maybe a little bit longer than it probably should, maybe because I don't want to kind of high rocks is a lot of it. It's a lot of like strength, it's a lot of fitness, a lot of running and so forth. And I have my weaknesses, as everyone does in certain places. So I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not so good at. So I'm working on the not so good things. But slowly we'll definitely get to high rocks, and I'm sure there'll be a link to post about it soon enough.
Indeed. Yeah, my knees and my ankles, to be fair, are like glass at the minute. But like what I'm focusing on at the moment. Brilliant. So in terms of maintaining momentum, this could be You've spoken about the habit, the ensuring that you've got that consistency. Now, let's say that all pays off and you've hit quota. You're halfway through the quarter and you've already hit quota, right? You're riding high. For some, maybe that could lead to lifting the foot off the gas a little bit. Others, maybe, they want to set records. But how would you go about sort of maintaining momentum even after hitting target early?
So I think like one thing to know is, and this is something I've heard like a lot of sales leaders say, is you are only as good as your last quarter.
No.
So you may have hit quota one quarter, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to hit quota this quarter. So taking your foot off the gas sort of in between, it doesn't necessarily help you kind of get ahead for next quarter. And kind of given that scenario that you said, so hit your quota fairly early on into the quarter, let's say halfway through the quarter, and you've got half of the quarter left. What you want to ultimately kind of do is you want to try and get ahead for next quarter, and you want to almost then start reflecting on actually how have I already hit quota this quickly this quarter? Was it my email messaging? Like, first of all, you want to start analyzing your activities, right? Where have I seen the most engagement? Is it actually through a phone call? Is it LinkedIn and so forth? And then start actually analyzing from, as an example, like all the meetings that I've got, what was their specific ICP? Was it a particular industry? Is it particular messaging that I used? And start to kind of refine that as you go along, because the more that you refine, the bigger skills that you're actually building to. Say, as an example, typically most, not all, but most SDRs want to go into an AE role. And now if they've hit quota, they are the perfect opportunity now to start building upon their skills to go into that AE position. So refining kind of why they've hit quota, how they've hit quota. Now, how can I now get ahead for next quarter ultimately?
Yeah.
I think, yes, you can kind of put your foot off the gas and you can kind of start coasting, but actually that's the difference between a okay performer or good performer to a really high achieving rep, where they start looking and start analyzing their own sort of methodologies and what they've been doing. And you want to kind of then start, based on that information, you then want to start kind of like prospecting to those particular ICPs and start building out your messaging and so forth, and kind of start refining your skills upon that as well. And then those are where that's where the real groundbreaking sort of strides start happening, where you start to analyze your own data that you can actually then start kind of implementing different things as you start moving forward. And that's typically what I've seen sort of in my career sort of so far in terms of kind of like, this is how you can kind of get ahead in those situations.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And as you said, having the visibility over the data, so you can run those tests, you've got hypotheses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having access to that data is really important to understand. Even if you're a high performer and if you're a low performer, you still want to analyze those pieces, because you can flip it the other way, where actually I'm halfway through the quarter and I have a very slim chance of hitting my quota at the end of the quarter. So now I really need to start analyzing. You should be doing it on a much regular basis through your manager. But as an individual contributor, you should already be analyzing that. You should know where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and that data should be leading you to making sort of those movements.
Yeah, agreed. It gives you the confidence, when you are doing well, but equally it gives you, it helps to make those really tough periods more manageable, at least for me, when I can actually look at the data and go, okay, I think it's here that things are falling apart. What if I tried something different? It does just help to keep you motivated, because it could be so easy to to go the other way and spiral, right?
Exactly. And it keeps you in lane. It keeps you sort of knowing where you should be going, the direction that you should be going. So if there's a channel that doesn't work for you, like that's okay. If, like, say, as an example, you're not great at cold calling, that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's now try and get you better at that particular channel. So it's okay to not be good at something. Like for me, like we talked about, like previously, kind of personally, like running is not a great thing for me. I don't necessarily always enjoy it, but I know that I've got to do it. So I'm taking strides to kind of, help myself be better at it.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah, indeed. And then do you have any other sort of strategies, tactics that you use yourself or you encouraged within your teams to help keep the motivation up when those bad days, weeks, months, quarters inevitably do appear?
Yeah, I think like it's especially like for an SDR who is so focused on prospects and so forth, you will have bad days and you will have bad weeks. It is part of the job, unfortunately. But there's ways that you can manage that a little bit better. So what I typically said to my SDRs is, you have a call block, you get through your calls, good or bad, you just take yourself away from your laptop, you go for a walk, you spend 10, 15 minutes away from your laptop and kind of really just being away from that particular environment, I think is really important. Even to the basics, like just taking breaks, like, taking a morning break, taking your lunch and taking, an afternoon break. You don't have to kind of, it doesn't have to be like a really long break. I'm going to go for a walk or whatever it is, but just take small breaks. Like if you're in the office, go and speak to a colleague or go get some coffee or something, just be away from that. That's really important. A really big thing is just talking about it. So if you've had a good call, you've had a bad call, speak to your manager about it, speak to another SDR about it, speak to an AE about it. Like just sharing kind of really helps, just whether it's kind of taking a burden off your shoulders or whether it's that's actually saying, I did actually do a really good job on that call. I really want to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
That's really important. And it's just making sure that you're respecting yourself and your mental health in terms of taking breaks when you need them, which I think sometimes we don't necessarily talk about for SDRs. It's just kind of being helpful to yourself and kind of just taking a break when you need.
And that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a super insightful session. If anyone does want to reach out, I guess LinkedIn is probably the best place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I will put your LinkedIn profile link in the description. Thank you very much again. And to everyone listening, until next time. Next week on the ISP NextGen Podcast.
My first job out of high school was in sales. I was flying in the newspaper, in a boiler room, kind of telemarketer. When I talk to someone today, I'm looking for help me understand your current state. Right? Like, how are you doing this today? What does today look like for you? Passing it to someone else and be like, did I miss something?